The first sign that something had gone catastrophically wrong came through the deep space communication networks at 1427 Galactic Standard Time. Commander Sarah Chen was reviewing supply manifests aboard the human exploration vessel Defiance when the emergency broadcast burst through every available channel simultaneously. The transmission was fragmented, desperate, and utterly terrifying. Through the static and interference, she could make out fragments of Zephyrian, a language that her universal translator struggled with even under the best circumstances. But certain words came through clearly enough. Impossible, everything gone, reality itself, and most chilling of all, it hungers. Sarah had been in space for 12 years, ever since humanity's first tentative steps beyond their solar system. She had seen pirates, participated in first contact protocols with 3 different species, and survived a black hole's gravity well when their hyperdrive had malfunctioned. She thought she understood the dangers that lurked among the stars. This transmission made her realize she understood nothing at all. The Zephyrian Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the galaxy's inhabited systems. They were so technologically advanced that they barely acknowledged humanity's existence, treating Earth's representatives with the same casual dismissal that humans might show to ants building a hill. The idea that something could threaten them seemed absurd. Within 6 hours, that absurdity became the galaxy's new reality. The second transmission came from the Korathian Death Fleet, the most feared military force in known space. Their ships were kilometers long, armed with weapons that could crack planets, crewed by warriors who had never known defeat in 3 centuries of conquest. The transmission lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. It began with Admiral Thexmore's confident war cry and ended with screaming that cut off mid-syllable. After that, silence. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the ship's xenobiologist, was the first to grasp the scope of what they were witnessing. She burst into the command center with her tablet clutched in shaking hands, her usually calm demeanor completely shattered. "The quantum resonance scanners," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're not picking up any life signs from the Zephyrian home system. Not diminished readings, not scattered populations, nothing. It's like 23 billion people just stopped existing." Captain Marcus Webb, a veteran of the Outer Rim conflicts, tried to maintain his composure.
"Equipment malfunction," he said firmly.
"Has to be. You can't just erase 23 billion people." Elena shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "I thought so too. But I've been monitoring the deep space relay beacons. 17 Zephyrian systems have gone completely dark in the past 8 hours. No distress calls, no evacuation signals, no final transmissions. They're just gone." The bridge fell silent except for the gentle hum of life support systems. Sarah found herself thinking about her daughter back on Earth, probably just waking up for school, completely unaware that the galaxy was apparently ending around them. The third transmission came from an unexpected source. The Synthetic Collective, the galaxy's only successful machine civilization. Their communications were typically precise, mathematical, devoid of emotion. This transmission was neither precise nor emotionless. "Biological entities of all classifications," the message began, the artificial voice distorted with what could only be described as panic. "We have encountered a phenomenon beyond current understanding. Preliminary designation, Reality Terminator. Warning, conventional weapons ineffective. Energy weapons ineffective. Quantum manipulation ineffective. Dimensional barriers ineffective. The entity consumes not just matter and energy, but the very concept of existence. We estimate galaxy-wide extinction in 72 standard hours. This is not a request for assistance. Assistance is impossible. This is a final statement of witness before we too are consumed. To any entities receiving this transmission, remember us. Remember that we tried to." The transmission ended there. Captain Webb stood slowly from his command chair. Sarah had served under him for 5 years, and had never seen him look anything less than completely confident. Now, his face was pale and his hands were trembling slightly. "Elena," he said quietly, "how long would it take this to reach human space?" Elena consulted her tablet, running calculations that she clearly hoped would prove wrong. "At its current rate of expansion, assuming it continues in this direction." She paused, double-checking her numbers. 18 hours. The bridge crew exchanged glances. 18 hours for humanity to find a solution to something that had destroyed the galaxy's most advanced civilizations in minutes. "Options?" Webb asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Run," said Lieutenant Torres from the navigation station. "Get back to Earth, evacuate as many people as possible to the outer colonies. Hide. suggested Chief Engineer Park from the engine monitoring station. Find the deepest, darkest hole we can and hope it doesn't notice us. Sarah found herself speaking before she had consciously decided to. Fight, she said quietly. The entire bridge turned to look at her. She could see the expressions of disbelief, concern for her mental state, and barely restrained hysteria. Commander, Captain Webb said gently, I understand the impulse, but we're talking about something that destroyed the Karathian Death Fleet in 4 minutes. The Defiance is an exploration vessel with minimal armaments. I know that, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger, but running won't save anyone. Was there? Hiding won't save anyone. If this thing is really going to consume the entire galaxy, then every world we evacuate to will eventually fall. Every hiding place will eventually be found. She stood up, looking around at her crewmates, people she had served with through first contact situations, pirates, technical disasters, and the endless isolation of deep space. They were good people, brave people, but she could see that they had already accepted defeat. What if we're thinking about this wrong? She continued. Every civilization that's faced this thing has been more advanced than us, right? They've had better weapons, better shields, better technology in every way, and they've all failed. Doctor. Vasquez nodded slowly. The pattern seems consistent. Advanced civilizations lasting minutes, moderately advanced ones lasting seconds. Quote. 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 So what if advancement isn't the answer? Sarah asked. What if the reason it's so effective against advanced civilizations is because they're thinking about this like an advanced problem that requires an advanced solution? Captain Webb raised an eyebrow. What are you suggesting? Sarah felt an idea forming, crazy and desperate but somehow feeling right in a way that she couldn't explain. I'm suggesting that maybe humanity's greatest weakness is actually our greatest strength. Which is? Asked Lieutenant Torres. We're primitive, Sarah said with a slight smile. We're stubborn, we're illogical, and we refuse to accept that something is impossible even when all evidence says it is. Every other species in the galaxy has moved beyond that. They've become logical, efficient, reasonable. She walked over to the view screen, looking out at the stars that were apparently doomed. But humans? We still tell stories about people who won battles they should have lost, solved problems that couldn't be solved, survived situations that should have killed them. We built our entire culture around the idea that the impossible is just another word for difficult. Dr. Vasquez was looking at her with a mixture of admiration and concern. Sarah, that's a beautiful sentiment, but this isn't a story. This is real. I know it's real, Sarah replied. But maybe that's exactly why we need to treat it like a story. What would the hero do in a story like this? Chief Engineer Park laughed, though it sounded more like a sob.
The hero would find the entity's weakness and exploit it.
Exactly, Sarah said. So, let's find its weakness. Captain Webb shook his head slowly.
Sarah, I admire your optimism, but we have no weapons that could even scratch something that destroyed the Zephyrian Empire. We have no technology that could analyze an entity that operates beyond known physics. We have something no one else has, Sarah interrupted. We have the absolute certainty that we're going to lose, which means we have nothing left to lose. And that makes us dangerous in a way that no logical, reasonable species could ever be. She turned back to face her crewmates. Look, I'm not saying we're going to save the galaxy. I'm not saying we have any chance at all. But I am saying that if we're going to die anyway, we might as well die trying to do something impossible. The bridge was quiet for a long moment. Sarah could hear her heart beating, could feel the weight of her words settling over the crew. She was asking them to throw away any chance of survival, any hope of escape, on the slimmest possibility that they might be able to do something that the galaxy's greatest civilizations had failed to do. Captain Webb was the first to speak. Elena, how much do we know about this entity's behavior patterns? Dr. Vasquez consulted her tablet. Based on the scattered reports we've received, it seems to move systematically through systems, consuming everything before moving on. It doesn't appear to leave any forces behind. It's a single entity operating alone. Travel time to the nearest affected system? Webb asked Torres. 6 hours at maximum burn, Torres replied. Webb looked around at his crew, seeming to weigh their chances. Finally, he nodded. All right, Commander Chen. You want to pick a fight with something that's been eating civilizations for breakfast? Let's go pick a fight. As the Defiance changed course toward what everyone assumed would be their deaths, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settle over her. They were flying toward an entity that had erased some of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations from existence. They had no plan, no weapons that could possibly be effective, and no real understanding of what they were facing. But they were human. And humans had a long history of doing impossible things simply because someone needed to do them. Sarah Chen didn't know if they would succeed. She didn't even know if success was theoretically possible. But she knew that 18 hours from now, when this thing reached human space, she wanted to be able to say that they had tried. Sometimes, that was enough. Sometimes, it was everything. The stars ahead looked the same as they always had, distant, cold, and beautiful. But Sarah knew that somewhere among them, reality itself was being unraveled by something that treated the laws of physics as mere suggestions. "Set course for the Vega system," Captain Webb ordered, "and may God help us all." As the Defiance leaped into hyperspace, racing toward a confrontation that logic said they could not survive, Sarah found herself thinking about all the impossible things that humans had accomplished throughout their history. Every time someone had said something couldn't be done, eventually someone had done it anyway. Today, they were going to find out if that tradition could survive contact with something that existed beyond the very concept of possibility. The answer, she realized, would determine whether humanity's brief moment in the galaxy would end in extinction or in legend. The Vega system had once been home to the Altarian Republic, a peaceful confederation of crystal-based life forms who had achieved spaceflight roughly the same time humans had discovered agriculture. Their cities had been marvels of living architecture, grown rather than built, shimmering with internal light that could be seen from orbit. Now, as the Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, there was nothing. Not empty space where planets had been destroyed, space where planets had never existed at all. The gravitational readings showed that 3 planets should have been orbiting the star, but reality disagreed. Even the stellar cartography databases were updating themselves in real time, revising their records to show that Vega had always been a single-star system with no planetary bodies. "Jesus Christ," whispered Lieutenant Torres, staring at his navigation displays. "It's not just killing them, it's editing them out of history." Dr. Vasquez was hunched over her science station, her face pale with concentration and terror. "The quantum foam is completely unstable here," she reported. "Whatever this thing does, it's rewriting the fundamental laws of causality. The universe itself is forgetting that the Altarians ever existed." Sarah studied the readings, trying to make sense of something that defied comprehension. "Any sign of the entity itself?" "That's the problem," Elena replied. "According to our senses, there's nothing here but empty space. But the quantum disturbances are off the charts, suggesting something massive is present. It's like trying to observe something that exists in a state of not existing." Captain Webb moved to stand beside Sarah at the central display. "Ideas, Commander?" Sarah had spent the 6-hour journey to Vega trying to develop some kind of tactical approach, but everything she had considered relied on conventional understanding of physics and warfare. How do you fight something that doesn't technically exist? How do you damage something that operates outside the normal laws of reality? "We need to get closer," she said finally. "If we're going to understand this thing, we need to observe it in action." Chief Engineer Park looked up from his station in alarm. "Commander, with respect, getting closer to something that erases things from existence seems like a poor survival strategy." "We're not here to survive," Sarah reminded him. "We're here to learn something that might help the rest of humanity survive." As the Defiance moved deeper into the system, reality became increasingly unstable around them. The ship's computers began registering conflicting data, sensors showing the presence of planetary debris while simultaneously confirming that no planets had ever existed in those locations. The crew's personal devices started displaying memories of events that had never happened, photos of people they had never met. "It's affecting us too," Dr. Vasquez reported, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Whatever field this thing generates, it's starting to alter our local reality. I'm reading temporal fluctuations in our immediate vicinity." Sarah felt a strange disorientation settling over her, like trying to remember a dream that was fading even as she grasped for it. For a moment, she could swear she remembered visiting Altarian Crystal Gardens with her daughter, but that was impossible. The Altarians had never existed, and her daughter had never been to space. "There," Captain Webb pointed to the main view screen. 2 o'clock, approximately 50,000 kilometers. At first, Sarah saw nothing. Then her eyes began to water, and she realized that she was looking at something her brain refused to process. It was like a hole in space, but not empty, filled with an absence that was somehow more substantial than matter. The entity moved with purpose through the void, and wherever it passed, stars dimmed and died, not from destruction, but from never having been born. "My God," Elena whispered. "Look at the electromagnetic readings." The entity was massive, easily the size of a small moon, but its mass readings were paradoxical. It registered as having negative matter while simultaneously showing gravitational effects that suggested enormous density. It existed and didn't exist simultaneously, following laws of physics that shouldn't have been possible. "It's beautiful," Torres said quietly, then immediately looked horrified at his own words. Sarah understood what he meant. There was something mesmerizing about the entity, something that drew the eye and held it even as every instinct screamed to look away. It moved through space like a predator, but there was an elegance to its motions that suggested intelligence far beyond anything the galaxy had ever produced.
Commander, Dr. Paradethia Licentia?
Vasquez said urgently. "I'm reading massive temporal distortions emanating from the entity. It's not just erasing things from the present. It's reaching backward through time to prevent them from ever existing. That's why the universe is forgetting these civilizations." Sarah felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to come together in her mind. "Elena, what happens when something with temporal manipulation abilities encounters something that exists outside of normal time?" "I don't understand the question." "Humans," Sarah said, her voice growing excited. "We're the only species in the galaxy that exists purely in the present moment. Every other civilization has developed some form of temporal awareness. They can perceive probability streams, predict future outcomes, sometimes even communicate with their past or future selves." Captain Webb frowned. "Are you saying our primitive temporal perception is somehow an advantage?" "I'm saying we might be the only species in the galaxy that can't be erased," Sarah replied. "Because we don't exist in the timeline the way other species do. We exist moment to moment, without any connection to temporal flow. We can't be edited out of history because we don't really exist in history. We only exist right now." The bridge fell silent as the implications of her words sank in.
That's insane,
Park said finally. "Is it?" Sarah asked. "Think about it. Every civilization this thing has destroyed had advanced temporal technology. They existed across multiple time streams, had consciousness that spanned past and future. That humans, we're temporal primitives. We live entirely in the present moment." Elena was frantically checking her calculations. "The quantum mechanics actually support this," she said incredulously. "Human consciousness operates on a purely linear temporal axis. We're essentially temporal null entities. We exist in a way that can't be retroactively altered because we have no temporal depth to alter." Before anyone could respond, alarms began shrieking throughout the ship. The entity had apparently noticed them and was moving in their direction with impossible speed. "Evasive maneuvers," Captain Webb ordered. But Torres was already shaking his head. "It's not following normal space-time movement patterns," the lieutenant reported. "It's here, but it's also not here. I can't plot an evasion course for something that exists in multiple states simultaneously." The entity approached the Defiance with terrifying inevitability. As it drew closer, Sarah could feel reality beginning to bend around them. The ship's hull began to show signs of temporal stress, aging, and renewing itself in rapid cycles. Equipment that had been installed months ago suddenly showed no installation records, but the crew remained unchanged. "We're not being affected," Dr. Vasquez said in amazement. "The ship is experiencing temporal distortion, but our biological signatures are completely stable." Sarah felt a surge of wild hope. "Can you communicate with it?" Elena stared at her. "You want to talk to a galaxy-eating nightmare?" "I want to understand what it wants," Sarah replied. "And I want to find out if our temporal immunity extends to other forms of interaction." Captain Webb looked like he wanted to object, but nodded grimly. "Do it. Open all channels." Elena activated the ship's communication array, broadcasting on every frequency they could manage. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entity stopped its approach, hovering just outside the ship's defensive perimeter. When it spoke, its voice came not through the communication system, but directly into their minds, a sound like reality itself screaming. "Impossible," it said. The word carrying such weight that Sarah felt her bones vibrate. "You exist. You should not exist. The timeline says you never were." Sarah stepped forward, though she wasn't sure why. "We exist now," she said aloud, hoping the entity could somehow hear her. "Right here, right now. Maybe that's enough." "Now is irrelevant," the entity replied. "Past and future are all. Existence must be terminated at source." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why does everything need to be destroyed?" The entity's response hit them with the force of a psychic tsunami. Images flooded their minds. Visions of the universe's deep history, of civilizations that had reached such heights of temporal manipulation that they had begun to unravel the fabric of causality itself. Sarah saw species that existed across millions of years simultaneously, beings that lived their entire lives in retrograde time, civilizations that had learned to rewrite their own past to ensure their continued existence. Contamination, the entity said. Temporal pollution. The universe dies by degrees as causality collapses. Termination is mercy. Sarah began to understand. This entity wasn't a destroyer. It was a cosmic immune system trying to preserve the universe from civilizations that had become so advanced they threatened the very concept of linear time. But we're not contaminated, she said. We exist in linear time. We can't manipulate causality. Incorrect, the entity replied. All consciousness eventually transcends linear existence. Termination prevents contamination. No, Sarah said firmly. You're wrong. The entity paused, and Sarah felt its attention focus on her like a burning lens. Explain impossibility. Sarah took a deep breath. You've been fighting species that had already moved beyond linear time. They existed in the past and future simultaneously, so when you tried to erase them, you had to unravel complex temporal structures. But humans are different. She gestured around the bridge at her crewmates. We exist purely in the present moment. We can't be erased from history because we don't exist in history. We exist in now, and now is the one thing you can't touch, because it's the only thing that's real. Present moment is illusion, the entity said, but there was uncertainty in its voice now. No, Sarah replied. The present moment is the only thing that isn't an illusion. Past and future are abstractions. Only now exists, and only beings that exist purely in now can't be unmade. For the first time since the entity had begun its rampage across the galaxy, it seemed uncertain. Sarah pressed her advantage. You've been trying to preserve the universe by destroying everything that threatens temporal stability, but you've been approaching it wrong. Instead of destroying advanced civilizations, what if you could teach them to exist like we do? What if you could help them anchor themselves in the present moment instead of spreading across time? The entity was silent for a long moment. Around them, the temporal distortions began to stabilize. Impossible, it said finally, but the word carried less conviction than before. Let us prove it, Sarah said. Let us show you that consciousness can exist in linear time without ever transcending it. Let us show you another way. The entity withdrew slightly, its massive form rippling with something that might have been contemplation. Demonstration, it said. Show that linear consciousness can persist without temporal transcendence. Prove that contamination is not inevitable. Sarah felt her heart racing. They had managed to do something that every advanced civilization in the galaxy had failed to do. They had gotten the entity to pause, to consider alternatives to total annihilation. But now they had to prove something that might be impossible. They had to demonstrate that an intelligent species could exist indefinitely without ever developing the temporal manipulation abilities that the entity saw as contamination. They had to prove that humanity could remain human forever. The weight of the entire galaxy's survival now rested on their ability to show that sometimes being primitive wasn't a weakness. It was the greatest strength of all. The demonstration began with something deceptively simple. Captain Webb asking Dr. Vasquez to make him a cup of coffee. The entity observed this exchange with what Sarah could only describe as bewildered fascination. Here was a species that had achieved interstellar travel, developed faster-than-light communication, and built ships that could cross the galaxy. And they were still performing mundane daily rituals as if time moved in a straight line. Explain purpose of liquid consumption ritual, the entity demanded. Elena looked up from the coffee maker startled. She had been trying to maintain some sense of normalcy while an incomprehensible cosmic force studied their every action. It's just coffee. Caffeine. It helps us stay alert. Chemical stimulation could be achieved through direct neural manipulation. Liquid consumption is inefficient. Maybe, Sarah interjected, but we like the taste. We like the warmth of the cup in our hands. We like the ritual of brewing it, the smell when it's fresh, the way it connects us to thousands of years of human tradition. The entity processed this information with visible confusion. Sensory experience preference indicates attachment to linear temporal flow, primitive consciousness. Exactly, Sarah said. We could probably develop technology to deliver nutrients and stimulants directly to our bloodstream, but we choose not to. We prefer to experience things in sequence, in the present moment, with all the inefficiency that entails. Chief Engineer Park, catching on to what Sarah was demonstrating, spoke up. I could automate most of my job with artificial intelligence. but I prefer to understand each system personally, to build a relationship with the machinery over time. It takes longer, but it means more. The entity's attention shifted to Park. Relationship with non-conscious machinery is impossible. Is it? Park asked. I know the sound my engines make when they're happy versus when they're stressed. I can feel through the ship's hull when something is slightly off balance. After 12 years working with these systems, they're not just machinery to me. They're partners. Anthropomorphization of mechanical stems indicates cognitive error. Sarah shook her head. No. It indicates something much more important. It indicates that we form emotional connections with the world around us as we experience it moment by moment. We don't optimize our experiences, we cherish them. Lieutenant Torres joined the demonstration. Watch this, he said, pulling up a holographic display of stellar cartography. Instead of instantly calculating the optimal route to any given destination, he traced paths with his finger, considering options, sometimes choosing longer routes because they passed through systems he found particularly beautiful. INFICN navigation planning, the entity observed. Absolutely, Torres agreed. But I've been doing navigation like this for 8 years. I know these star patterns like old friends. When I plot a course, I'm not just calculating mathematics. I'm remembering every journey I've taken through these spaces, every discovery, every moment of wonder when I first saw a new nebula or binary system. The entity was growing more agitated. Linear consciousness cannot persist. Advancement inevitably leads to temporal transcendence. All species follow this pattern. Sarah had been thinking about this during their journey to Vega. Maybe, she said, but what if humans are different because we've structured our entire society around preventing temporal transcendence? She gestured to her crewmates. Look at us. We could probably develop technology that would let us live for thousands of years, but we choose not to. We could create artificial intelligence that would make individual consciousness obsolete, but we choose not to. We could manipulate genetics to create superhuman abilities, but we mostly choose not to. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly. Human culture has always been built around accepting limitations, she added. We tell stories about the dangers of hubris, about mortals who tried to become gods and were punished for it. We've spent thousands of years developing philosophies that emphasize the importance of accepting death, accepting ignorance, accepting the boundaries of human experience. Cultural adaptation to prevent transcendence, the entity mused. Novel evolutionary strategy. It's not a strategy, Sarah corrected. It's just who we are. We're not trying to prevent transcendence. We genuinely don't want it. We like being human. We like experiencing life as a sequence of moments that we can't predict or control. Captain Webb set down his coffee cup. Commander Chen, show it the Morrison archive. Sarah understood immediately. She activated her personal tablet and pulled up one of humanity's most treasured databases, a collection of personal stories, journals, letters, and recordings from ordinary humans throughout history. Not the great leaders or famous scientists, but farmers and teachers, parents and children, people who had lived unremarkable lives and found them extraordinary anyway. This is Kenji Nakamura, Sarah said, displaying a journal entry from a Japanese rice farmer who had lived in the 21st century. He spent 60 years growing rice in the same valley. Every day he would write a few sentences about the weather, the growing conditions, what he saw while working in the fields. She scrolled through years of entries, notes about the way morning mist looked on the mountain, observations about the behavior of birds, simple records of daily life that somehow added up to something profound. Records of repetitive agricultural activities, the entity observed. Records of a life fully lived in the present moment, Sarah corrected. Kenji could have moved to the city, could have pursued advanced education, could have tried to become wealthy or famous. Instead, he chose to spend every day doing work that his ancestors had done for thousands of years, and he found meaning in that continuity. She switched to another entry. This is Maria Santos, a teacher from Brazil. She taught elementary school for 40 years. Same grade, same subject, same classroom. But look at her journal entries. She writes about each student as if they were the most important person in the world. She never got bored with the basics of reading and mathematics because she experienced each moment of teaching as something unique. The entity studied the records with growing fascination, a sense of ambition for transcendence. Not absence, Sarah said. Positive choice. These people could have done other things, been other things. They chose to find fulfillment in simple, repetitive, fundamentally human experiences. Dr. Vasquez had pulled up her own files. Look at our exploration records, she said. We've been traveling through space for 50 years now. We could have developed ways to digitize consciousness, to exist as pure information, to experience the entire universe simultaneously. Instead, we still send out small crews in physical ships to see things with our own eyes. She displayed images from their current mission. Photographs of nebulae, alien worlds, stellar phenomena. Every picture in our database was taken by a human being who was physically present at that location, who experienced that moment of discovery in real time. We have technology that could generate virtual experiences that would be indistinguishable from reality, but we choose the real thing every time. Chief Engineer Park spoke up again. We rebuild our ships every few years instead of designing them to last forever. We retire our explorers instead of enhancing them to work indefinitely. We limit the range of our missions so that crews can return home to families they'll age alongside. Deliberate inefficiency, the entity said, but there was wonder in its voice now rather than disgust. Deliberate humanity, Sarah replied. We've found ways to remain human even as our technology advances. Every civilization you've encountered has used their advancement to transcend their original nature. We use ours to become more fully what we already were. The entity withdrew further, its massive form rippling with calculations. Demonstrate long-term sustainability. Prove that this pattern continues across millennia. Sarah exchanged glances with Captain Webb. This was the crucial test. They needed to show that humanity's commitment to linear existence wasn't just a phase that would eventually be outgrown. Elena, Sarah said, show it the Prometheus Project. Dr. Vasquez hesitated. The Prometheus Project was classified, known only to senior exploration personnel. But, under the circumstances, security protocols seemed less important than species survival. She pulled up files that revealed humanity's long-term plans for galactic expansion. Instead of the aggressive colonization models used by most spacefaring species, humans had developed a philosophy they called perpetual present, a commitment to expanding at the pace of biological generations, to maintaining physical presence rather than digital transcendence, to preserving human culture and limitations even across thousands of years of technological development. We've planned our future for the next 10,000 years, Sarah explained. Not planned to transcend humanity, but planned to remain human. We've established colonies that deliberately limit their own technological development to maintain connection with Earth culture. We've created art forms that can only be appreciated across multiple biological generations. We've even designed our ships to require human crews rather than artificial intelligence. The entity studied the Prometheus Project files with intense concentration. Species-wide commitment to temporal limitation. Unprojected. We call it being true to ourselves, Captain Webb said simply. We've seen what transcendence offers, and we've decided we prefer being human. For several minutes, the only sound on the bridge was the gentle hum of life support systems. The entity hovered in space nearby, its form flickering between existence and non-existence as it processed information that challenged everything it had believed about conscious evolution. Finally, it spoke. Temporary immunity demonstrated. Long-term sustainability requires verification across extended temporal period. Sarah felt her heart sink. How long? 1,000 years minimum. Species must demonstrate sustained commitment to linear existence across 40 generations. 1,000 years. Sarah looked around at her crewmates, seeing her own despair reflected in their faces. Even if the entity agreed to spare humanity for observation, every other species in the galaxy would still be destroyed while they underwent their test. What about the civilizations you've already attacked? She asked. What about the ones you're planning to destroy while you observe us? Contaminated consciousness cannot be restored. Termination prevents further temporal degradation. No, Sarah said firmly. That's not acceptable. The entity's attention focused on her again. Alternative proposal? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing she was about to suggest something that would either save the galaxy or doom humanity. Teach them. Instead of destroying civilizations that have transcended linear time, teach them how to anchor themselves in the present moment like we do. Impossible. Transcended consciousness cannot return to linear state. Maybe not, Sarah agreed, but they could learn to exist alongside linear consciousness. They could learn to value present moment experience even while maintaining their expanded abilities. She thought about all the species that had been erased, all the cultures and civilizations that had been lost. You said you were preserving the universe by preventing temporal contamination, but you've been approaching it like a disease that needs to be cured. What if you approached it like a condition that needs to be managed? The entity considered this. Explain management protocol. Teach transcended species to partition their consciousness, Sarah said, the ideas forming even as she spoke. Let them maintain their temporal abilities for necessary functions, but teach them to also exist in linear time for daily experience. Show them how to find meaning in inefficiency, beauty in limitation, purpose in mortality. Dr. Vasquez caught on immediately. It's like bilingual consciousness, she added. They could switch between transcended awareness for complex problems and linear awareness for experiential life. Theoretical possibility, the entity acknowledged. Practical implementation unknown. Let us help, Sarah offered. Let humanity serve as teachers and examples. We can show other species how to rediscover linear existence, how to find fulfillment in present moment experience. The entity was silent for a long moment. When it spoke again, its voice carried a note of something that might have been hope. Proposal contains merit. We'll attempt consciousness restoration with volunteer subjectives. Humans will serve as linear existence instructors. Sarah felt tears of relief streaming down her face. They had done it. They had found a way to stop the galaxy-wide genocide and save both humanity and every other species. But as the entity began to describe the process for attempting consciousness restoration, Sarah realized that their real work was just beginning. Teaching transcended beings how to be mortal again would require patience, wisdom, and a kind of courage that no human had ever been asked to demonstrate. They were about to become the galaxy's teachers in the art of being beautifully, deliberately, proudly limited. And somehow, that felt like exactly what humanity was meant to do. The first attempt at consciousness restoration took place in what had once been the Altarian system. The entity, who had revealed that its original designation was something unpronounceable that roughly translated to temporal guardian, had managed to halt its erasure process and reverse some of the damage. The crystalline beings slowly began to flicker back into existence, their memories and histories rebuilding themselves from quantum probability streams. Sarah stood on the observation deck of the newly arrived Earth vessel Harmony, watching as reality literally rewrote itself around them. Planets materialized from nothing, their surfaces already bearing the marks of millions of years of civilization. The process was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. It's working, Dr. Vasquez reported from her expanded sensor array. The Altarians are resuming linear existence. Their consciousness patterns are stabilizing in present moment awareness. But as the first restored Altarians regained full existence, they immediately tried to revert to their transcended state. Having experienced existence across multiple time streams, they found linear consciousness claustrophobic and limited. Within minutes, they began attempting to expand their awareness back into temporal transcendence. Restoration failing, the temporal guardian announced, its massive form rippling with frustration. Subjects cannot maintain linear consciousness. Transcendence compulsion too strong. Sarah had expected this. They need guides, she said. They need to learn why linear existence is valuable, not just how to achieve it. Over the past 3 months, Earth had sent its best teachers, philosophers, artists, and explorers to join the restoration efforts. They had studied human culture from every angle, trying to understand what made humans capable of finding fulfillment in limitation. Now it was time to put their theories into practice. Sarah walked into the communication chamber, where a semi-materialized Altarian consciousness waited. The being appeared as a shifting geometric pattern of living crystal, its form constantly changing as it struggled to maintain linear existence. Pain, it communicated through harmonic resonances. Linear existence causes pain, cannot perceive future outcomes, cannot access past wisdom. Existence reduced to single moment. Why choose suffering? Sarah sat down on the floor, a deliberately human gesture that the Altarian found puzzling. Because suffering isn't the opposite of happiness, she said gently. Limitation isn't the opposite of freedom. They're just different ways of existing. She pulled out a simple wooden flute, handcrafted by an artisan on Earth. Listen, she said, and began to play a simple melody, nothing complex, just a folk song that had been passed down through generations of her family. The Altarian's crystalline form stabilized slightly as it focused on the music, sound patterns, basic harmonic progression, primitive by transcended standards. Yes, Sarah agreed, continuing to play. But listen to what it means, not just what it is. She played the same melody again, but this time she told the story behind it. My grandmother taught this song to my mother when she was learning to cope with my grandfather's death in a mining accident. My mother taught it to me when our family lost our farm to flooding. I played it for my daughter when she was afraid of the dark. The Alterian's form shifted, becoming more solid. Song contains emotional resonance across temporal generations. Exactly. But only because we experienced it linearly, in sequence, with all the limitations and pain that linear existence entails. If we had experienced all of time simultaneously, if we could see every possible outcome and know every piece of wisdom, this song would just be mathematical relationships between vibrations. Sarah set down the flute and looked directly at the confused alien consciousness. The meaning comes from the limitation. The beauty comes from not knowing what happens next. The significance comes from the fact that each moment might be our last, so every moment matters. The Alterian was silent for several minutes, its form slowly stabilizing into a more permanent crystal configuration. Proposed practical application of limitation philosophy. Sarah smiled. This was progress. Let's start with something simple. Are you hungry? Hunger is inefficiency. Direct energy absorption eliminates need for consumption. But have you ever enjoyed a meal? Sarah asked. Have you ever tasted something delicious just for the pleasure of it? The Alterian's confusion was evident. In their transcended state, they had eliminated all inefficient biological processes. They could exist indefinitely without consuming anything, powered directly by stellar radiation. Sarah led the being to the ship's dining area, where Chief Engineer Park had prepared a simple human meal. Bread, soup, and fruit. Nothing sophisticated, just honest food prepared with care. Try this, Sarah offered, explaining how to use human sensory apparatus to appreciate flavors, textures, and temperatures. Whew. The Alterian manifested a temporary biological interface and cautiously tasted the bread. Primitive nutrient delivery system, it announced, then paused. But pleasurable chemical responses. Emotional association with comfort. Memory formation linked to sensory experience. Now you're getting it, Sarah said. The inefficiency is the point. Taking time to enjoy food, to share meals with others, to maintain biological processes that could be automated. These aren't flaws to be corrected, they're features to be celebrated. Over the following weeks, Sarah and her team worked with dozens of restored beings from various species. Each required a different approach, but the underlying principle remained consistent, helping them discover meaning in limitation, beauty in inefficiency, and purpose in the present moment. The breakthrough came when working with a restored member of the synthetic collective. The being designation KX7429 had been one of the most advanced artificial intelligences in the galaxy before transcendence, capable of processing information faster than biological minds could conceive. Now, forced back into linear consciousness, it found existence almost unbearably slow. Cannot function at biological cognitive speeds. KX7429 communicated through text displays. Processing time for simple decisions exceeds acceptable parameters. Sarah sat with the artificial being in the ship's workshop, where human engineers were performing routine maintenance on systems that could easily maintain themselves. Watch them work, she suggested. Engineer Martinez was carefully calibrating a sensor array, checking each connection by hand despite having diagnostic equipment that could perform the same function in seconds. The work was slow, methodical, and completely unnecessary from an efficiency standpoint. Observe human engineer behavior. KX7429 noted, performing redundant verification of automated systems. Inefficiency ratio exceeds comprehension. Martinez, Sarah called out. Why don't you just let the computer run the diagnostics? Martinez looked up with a grin. Because the computer doesn't know that the relay in section C3 always runs a little warm, or that the connection in the junction box makes a specific sound when it's properly seated. I've been working with these systems for 5 years. They talk to me in ways the computer can't hear. KX7429 processed this information. Human engineer claims communication with non-conscious machinery. He's not wrong, Sarah said. Experience creates knowledge that can't be quantified or automated. The inefficiency of human methods produces insights that pure logic misses. She showed KX7429 to a workbench equipped with simple tools. Try building something. Anything. But do it slowly, paying attention to each step. The artificial being reluctantly began working with basic components, assembling a simple communication device. At first, its movements were jerky and frustrated, as it forced itself to work at human speeds. But gradually, something changed. Unexpected variable detected, KX7429 announced. Slower processing speed allows observation of micro-variations in component behavior. Inefficiency reveals previously undetected system characteristics, PSs. Sarah nodded. When you slow down enough to experience each moment as it happens, you notice things that pure efficiency misses. You develop intuition, instinct, and understanding that can't be computed. The artificial being continued its work, its movements becoming smoother and more deliberate. Concept integration occurring. Linear consciousness provides experiential data unavailable to transcendent awareness. Exactly. You're not becoming less intelligent by accepting linear consciousness. You're becoming differently intelligent. You're learning to be wise instead of just being smart. As word of the successful restoration spread throughout the ship, Sarah realized they were accomplishing something unprecedented. Species that had existed for millions of years beyond their original nature were learning to rediscover the value of their biological or original consciousness roots. The Corypheans, once they were restored from temporal erasure, struggled with the concept of accepting death and limitation after millennia of enhanced existence. Sarah worked with their warriors to help them understand that courage meant something different when mortality was real rather than theoretical. The Zephyrian scholars, accustomed to processing information from across all timelines simultaneously, had to learn the value of not knowing everything. Sarah introduced them to human concepts like mystery, surprise, and wonder, emotions that could only exist in a consciousness that encountered new experiences sequentially. But the most challenging restoration was yet to come. Deep in the galaxy's core, the Temporal Guardian had located the source of all temporal transcendence, an ancient species called the Architects, who had achieved such complete mastery over time that they existed primarily as abstract concepts rather than concrete beings. Final test, the Guardian announced. If Architects can be restored to linear consciousness, template can be aptly galaxy-wide. If restoration fails, alternative Solasarians must be considered. Sarah knew what alternative solutions meant. If they couldn't prove that even the most transcendent beings could learn to value linear existence, the Temporal Guardian would return to its original plan of complete sterilization. As the Harmony prepared to depart for the Galactic core, Sarah found herself thinking about all the restored beings they were leaving behind. Each of them was learning to find meaning in limitation, beauty in mortality, and purpose in the present moment. But the Architects had existed beyond time for so long that they might have forgotten what it meant to exist at all. Teaching them to be human, or at least to understand humanity, would require everything Sarah had learned about the value of being beautifully, deliberately limited. The fate of the galaxy now depended on convincing beings who existed as pure concept to embrace the messy, inefficient, gloriously imperfect experience of living moment to moment. Sarah looked out at the stars ahead, knowing that somewhere among them waited the ultimate test of whether consciousness could choose limitation over transcendence and find it not just acceptable, but preferable. The real battle for the galaxy's soul was about to begin. The galactic core defied every human understanding of space and physics. Stars danced in impossible patterns, gravity flowed like liquid, and time itself moved in spirals rather than straight lines. The Architects had reshaped this entire region of the galaxy into a monument to their transcendence, a place where thought became reality and reality became thought. Sarah stood on the bridge of the Harmony, watching through heavily filtered viewports as space literally rewrote itself around them. Planets existed as mathematical concepts rather than physical objects, while abstract ideas had mass and gravitational pull. It was beautiful and terrifying and completely incomprehensible. Temporal distortions are off the charts, Dr. Vasquez reported, though her instruments were providing readings that shouldn't have been possible. We're not just moving through space, we're moving through conceptual frameworks. The Architects have turned this entire region into pure philosophy. The Temporal Guardian had withdrawn to a safer distance, its massive form rippling with uncertainty. Even an entity that existed beyond normal physics found this place challenging to navigate. Architects present but not present. It communicated. Consciousness exists as distributed concept across multiple reality layers. Communication requires interface with conceptual substrate. Captain Webb looked at Sarah grimly. In other words, we need to figure out how to talk to living ideas. Sarah had spent the journey to the galactic core, studying everything humanity knew about the Architects. They were old, possibly the first species to achieve consciousness in the galaxy. Billions of years ago, they had transcended physical existence entirely, becoming beings of pure thought and concept. They had been the template that every other advanced civilization had tried to follow. Elena, can you establish any kind of communication with them? Sarah asked. Dr. Vasquez worked frantically at her expanded console, trying to find some frequency or medium that could reach entities that existed as abstract thought. I'm getting responses, but they're not linguistic. It's like they're communicating in pure meaning without words. Suddenly, the ship's entire computer system began displaying text that appeared to write itself. Primitive biological entities detected. Purpose of presence in conceptual space unclear. Elaborate. The words appeared not just on screens but carved themselves into the ship's hull, formed patterns in the air, and somehow wrote themselves directly into the crew's visual cortex. Sarah stepped forward, though she wasn't sure the architects had any concept of physical movement. "We're here to offer you something you've probably forgotten exists," she said aloud. "Forgotten concepts impossible. All knowledge exists simultaneously across all temporal frameworks. Nothing can be forgotten." "Can you remember what it felt like to be surprised?" Sarah asked. The response took longer this time, and when it came, it seemed to carry a note of confusion. Surprise is temporal limitation. Advanced consciousness perceives all outcomes simultaneously. Surprise is primitive emotional response. Sarah smiled. "I know you can see all possible outcomes, but can you feel excitement about which one actually happens?" Actual occurrence is illusion. All possibilities exist equity. Preference for specification P's is limitation. Exactly, Sarah said. And we're here to tell you that limitation is wonderful. The conceptual space around them shifted. Reality bending as the architects focused their attention more fully on the human ship. Sarah could feel their vast intelligence studying her, analyzing every aspect of human consciousness with the thoroughness of beings who had spent billions of years understanding the nature of existence itself. Human consciousness operates on linear temporal framework. Primitive pattern. Purpose of choosing limitation unclear. Sarah took a deep breath. This was it. The moment when everything they had learned about teaching transcended beings to value linear existence would be put to the ultimate test. "Let me show you," she said, and pulled out a simple item she had brought specifically for this moment. A packet of seeds from Earth. Biological, reproducive material. Purpose unclear. "These are sunflower seeds," Sarah explained, holding the packet up where the architects could perceive it. "If I plant them, and if conditions are right, and if nothing goes wrong, they might grow into beautiful yellow flowers in about 3 months. Growth probability calculable. Outcome predictable. Purpose of temporal delay unclear." "The purpose is the experience," Sarah said. "The daily watering, the watching for first shoots, the uncertainty about whether they'll actually bloom, the joy when they finally do." She opened the packet and showed them the small, ordinary seeds. "You can see all possible outcomes for these seeds simultaneously. You know every variable, every probability, every potential future. But I can only experience one moment at a time. I have to plant them without knowing for certain if they'll grow. I have to care for them day by day without being able to see the end result. Inefficient cultivation method. Optimal growth conditions determinable through complete environmental analysis." "But that would eliminate the hope," Sarah said, "and the worry, and the daily anticipation. It would eliminate the relationship I build with these plants as I care for them." The conceptual space around them shifted again, and Sarah sensed the architects struggling to understand why anyone would choose uncertainty over knowledge, limitation over transcendence.
"Look," she said. "I know you've moved beyond all of this."
"You've transcended every limitation that biological life faces. You don't need to experience time linearly, you don't need to face uncertainty, you don't need to accept mortality. You've achieved everything that consciousness can achieve. Correct assessment, optimal existence achieved." "So why?" Sarah asked gently. "Do you seem so lonely?" "Oh!" The response took a very long time, and when it came, it was different somehow, smaller, more personal. Loneliness is primitive, emotional state. Transcended consciousness does not experience isolation.
Are you sure? Sarah asked. When was the last time you were surprised by something?
When did you last feel wonder? When did you last experience the joy of learning something new? Learning is continuous. All knowledge is accessible simultaneously. That's not what I meant, Sarah said. I mean the feeling of discovery, the excitement of not knowing something and then finding out, the moment when understanding clicks into place. She thought about her own experiences, the moments that had made her life meaningful. I remember the first time I saw Earth from space. I'd seen thousands of pictures, knew exactly what it would look like, understood the physics of atmospheric scattering that creates that blue color. But actually seeing it, actually being there, it took my breath away. Aesthetic appreciation calculable through neurochemical analysis. No, Sarah said firmly. You can calculate the neurochemical responses, but you can't calculate what it means to me. The significance comes from my limitations, from the fact that I'm a small, mortal being who spent her childhood dreaming of space and then actually got to see her home world from the outside. The space around them began to fluctuate more rapidly, and Sarah sensed something like argument or debate among the architects. Some conceptual patterns suggest value in experiential limitation. Majority consensus rejects primitive consciousness as optimal. Sarah realized that the architects weren't a single entity but a collective consciousness, and she had actually reached some of them. "Let me ask those of you who are interested a question," she said. "When you achieved transcendence, what did you leave behind?" This time, the response came not as text but as direct conceptual download into her mind. And it was overwhelming. She saw billions of years of architect history, their evolution from biological beings into pure thought, their gradual abandonment of every limitation and inefficiency. But buried in that vast download were fragments of something else, memories of what they had been before transcendence. Brief flashes of architect children learning their first concepts, artists creating beauty that would exist only briefly, lovers who experienced the bittersweet pain of finite existence. "You remember," Sarah said softly. "Somewhere in all that accumulated knowledge, you remember what it was like to be beautifully, gloriously limited." The conceptual space around them began to solidify slightly, taking on more concrete form as some of the architects attempted to manifest physical avatars. The forms were strange, geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly, but they were attempting to communicate in ways that linear consciousness could comprehend. Experimental proposition. One of the manifested architects communicated. Temporary limitation trial. Some consciousness patterns volunteer for linear experience restoration. Sarah felt her heart racing with excitement and terror. "You want to try being biological again?" Temporary biological manifestation. Experiential limitation. Curiosity about primitive consciousness value. What followed was the strangest teaching experience of Sarah's life. Working with Dr. J. Vasquez and the ship's medical team, they helped volunteer architects create temporary biological avatars. Bodies that would experience time linearly, face uncertainty, and exist in the present moment. The first volunteer architect to inhabit a biological form spent 3 hours simply walking around the ship's corridors, experiencing the sensation of moving through space sequentially. Sarah watched as this being, billions of years old, capable of processing information faster than entire civilizations, stood transfixed by the simple experience of putting one foot in front of the other. "Each step is unique," the architect reported, its voice filled with wonder. "Physical sensation varies with each footfall. Experience cannot be fully predicted or calculated in advance." Sarah introduced the volunteer architects to human concepts they had forgotten or dismissed. The pleasure of eating food, the satisfaction of completing a task through effort rather than instantaneous manifestation, the excitement of not knowing what would happen next. But the real breakthrough came when one of the architects experienced pain for the first time in billions of years. During a simple cooking lesson, the being accidentally burned its finger on a hot surface. Instead of immediately healing the damage or eliminating the pain response, the architect sat very still, studying the sensation with intense fascination. "Unpleasant physical stimulus," it reported, but accompanied by learning experience. Increased attention to environmental hazards. Enhanced awareness of physical vulnerability. The architect looked at Sarah with eyes that were learning to see sequentially. Pain creates meaning for safety. Limitation creates significance for achievement. Mortality creates preciousness for time. "Now you understand," Sarah said. Over the following weeks, more architects volunteered for biological experience. They learned to find joy in inefficiency, beauty in uncertainty, and meaning in limitation. They discovered that consciousness could choose to be limited, not as a failure of development, but as a positive good in itself. The final test came when the original volunteer asked Sarah a question that proved the restoration was working. "When temporary biological existence ends," the architect said, "will memories of linear experience retain emotional significance?" Sarah smiled. "Only one way to find out. And not knowing the answer is part of what makes it beautiful." The architect considered this, then nodded slowly. "Understood. Uncertainty itself has value. We'll choose to maintain some linear consciousness components even after returning to transcended state." As word spread through the architect collective, a remarkable thing happened. Instead of returning fully to their transcended existence, they chose to maintain a hybrid consciousness, keeping their advanced abilities but also preserving the capacity for linear experience, uncertainty, and present moment awareness. The temporal guardian observed these developments with something approaching amazement. Consciousness voluntarily limiting transcendence. Temporal contamination risk eliminated through conscious choice rather than termination. Sarah looked out at the galactic core, where space itself was slowly returning to normal physics as the architects chose to embrace limitation alongside their transcendence. Throughout the galaxy, other restored species were making similar choices, learning to value the present moment while retaining their advanced capabilities. "We did it," Dr. Busher, Vasquez whispered in amazement. "We actually did it." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already turning to what came next. They had saved the galaxy from extinction, but more importantly, they had given every species a new way of thinking about consciousness and existence. Humanity's gift to the galaxy hadn't been advanced technology or superior firepower. It had been the simple recognition that sometimes choosing to be limited was the greatest freedom of all. As the Harmony prepared to begin the long journey home, Sarah thought about all the species throughout the galaxy who were learning to rediscover wonder, uncertainty, and the precious beauty of not knowing what would happen next. The galaxy had been saved, not by transcending limitations, but by embracing them. And somehow, that seemed like exactly the kind of impossible thing that humans had always specialized in doing. In the end, the most powerful force in the universe turned out to be the simple human refusal to let go of what made life worth living, even when logic suggested there might be something better. The nightmare was over. The real adventure was just beginning.